Hello, this is Kade, and today I want to talk about the medical career in Star Citizen. And for my specifics, we're going to really be looking, of course, at the ships. Because right now we have the somewhat full trio from ambulance to a full-on floating hospital in the MISC Endeavor with the Hope configuration. And we're also going to look, of course, like what would you need for your own personal career or for your organization. Now, to start it off with, of course, we are looking at the Drake Red. This is going to be your ambulance. So, it is as they say, the starting ship for a medical career. If you want to go into medical career, this is the lowest end that you can get right now. Now, we're all, of course, quite well familiar with the Cutlass series, and it has undergone quite some changes. But right now, if we're going to look at the most recent available information on the Red, and we're looking at the images, this is what the interior looks like. So what we see is a bunch of beds, which could be used for patients, maybe for, simple light wounds or things that have been stabilized. And we got what looks like 2 medical beds, which are probably, I guess, used to stabilize patients with more serious injuries. I'm not expecting the Cutlass Red to do a lot of fixing you up. As I say, it's really more of an ambulance type ship, so it may fix some minor injuries and things like that, but overall its role will just be transporting people to a ship with actual proper medical facilities. Now, this can be on the low end, of course, an RSI Apollo. It can, of course, be the floating hospital, as we said, in the MISC Endeavor Hope configuration, or it can be one of the larger military ships, which will also have full-on medical facilities, is my very fair assumption. Of course, then we're looking at ships of Idris and above, where we're talking about larger military ships. Now, stepping up, of course, from the Cutlass, we go to the RSI Apollo. The Apollo is the golden midway. It's a very capable little ship. It has to make some choices in what it wants to do regarding the configuration with your beds. Do excuse the birds outside, the windows are open. But besides that, it's really a very good ship, and I've gone over it in some detail in my video regarding it, and I think it's going to be very capable, and it has 2 advantages over the Cutlass. Number 1, it can actually treat a very wide range of injuries, from very minor to very severe, and it has the additional means of extracting patients by the use of those medical drones, which means it does not have to get in there itself. It can send out a drone to pick somebody up or to transfer them, which may come into use later on. So if we see here, pick them up with a drone, you can just stay yourself in orbit, and overall you're just more stable. Interior, again, like if you see the choices here, of course, what are you going to do with the beds? You can have 3 possible configurations, and the more serious of injuries you want to treat, the less capacity you get for each of the medical bays. Personal thinking is still that a 2-1 configuration is going to be best, because the minor injuries seems like mostly can be cured with a Medipen as well. So just like, shut the fuck up, here's a Medipen and get the hell out of here again, sort of deal. Then on the high end, we're of course looking at the MISC Endeavor, and we're looking at the medical module. Now, this is very much a floating hospital. If you see on the left, we have like probably your recovery rooms. And then on the right, in these oval areas, we have the treatment rooms where we can treat minor injuries to very severe injuries. And I do wonder perhaps if the MISC Endeavor will have the facilities to, give people new limbs, like cybernetic limbs, or maybe regrow biological ones, we don't know. Well, I do think it does need that level of capability upgrade over the Apollo class. Otherwise, you only have capacity, and what we've seen from going from the Cutlass to the Apollo, we go up in capacity and in capability, and I'm expecting the same to be for the MISC Endeavor. Now, of course, you need to get patients to a hospital, and for that reason we're looking at the launch bay. Now, originally this plan was like this: launch bay can hold multiple Cutlasses, and that was the idea behind it. As we know, of course, in Star Citizen things change, and when they change they tend to grow, and especially with the older ships. You'll see with the more recent ships, they have a much better idea right from the get-go what size these ships needs to be. So they're instantly They're mostly made correctly to size during the concept stages already. So we're not seeing a lot of changes in those anymore, dimension-wise, because we learn better what we need. We've learned from our mistakes, so to speak, in the past. The issue is right now that if you look at it, this launch bay will barely fit a Cutlass. So not multiples, no, a Cutlass. So is the MISC Endeavor going to grow quite a bit? It remains to be seen. I would not be surprised though if it does see some growth in regards of its capabilities. Maybe the ship itself won't grow as much as that they will perhaps lower the launch bay a little bit so it can be enlarged itself without needing to enlarge the ship as much. I think that would be a more sensible solution, because if you grow the ship, then you need to look at all of the modules you want to put on there. Again, this is a bit of speculation. However, it does bring up the fact, like, if you're flying the Apollo, how can you transfer your patients then to the Endeavor? Because my initial thought was like, oh well, if they can fit multiple Cutlasses, then surely you can fit an Apollo in that launch bay. However, when I looked at the ship size charts and just compared those things, it was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So either the launch bay is going to be large enough so that you can actually park a Apollo in there to transfer patients, or alternatively, you can use those medical drones to transfer your patients again. If we look here, above this orangey type of structure, just behind the launch bay area, you got like this door, and it looks very much like it could be an airlock which could open up where one of those medical drones could come in, it could close down, transfer onwards, and a patient can be received through that means. The downside, of course, to this would be that it's extremely inefficient, because you need to load a patient into the drone, fly it over, go through there, get them off, fly the drone back out. It's going to take way too much time to transfer patients like that, whereas the Cutlass just lands in the thing and you run up in there with a stretcher and you run back out into the medical area. It's of course going to take a lot less time. So the older alternative is that the Endeavor Hope modules themselves come with these drones as well, so they can just send out 6 drones of their own towards a Apollo class. And the Apollo guys, they will load up all of the people right one after another, and those drones will just go back in sequence to the MISC Endeavor, where they can receive the treatment. Those are options that I can see right now, but the problem with the whole Endeavor and the modules regarding it is most of it is quite old news, so we just don't really know what is going to happen with it, and it is just one of those ships that's still from the earlier concept era when they still did not really have a right idea, I would guess, for what ships would need it to be. So it's going to be a little bit more tricky. So to go back to the beginning then, what will you need for your medical career? Well, if you look at yourself in person, like you start maybe off with a Cutlass Red. However, if you're just looking at operating this with yourself and a friend, because I would say do not go with a medical career alone. I don't think any of these ships are really suited for that. You will need 2 to 3 people at minimum for a medical career. But the Cutlass Red, of course, makes you really, your most budget-oriented step up into this medical career field. That said, it's more as an ambulance, so it gets in there, gets patients, and moves them to a place that can actually do something with them. Which I think, as a career option, is not going to be all that interesting. Flying back and forth with patients. Maybe, if that's your dream, or maybe you're an ambulance driver in real life and you like to continue doing that in game, all the power to you. But I think if you really want a bit more out of your gameplay, you want to move on from your ambulance and you really want to look at an RSI Apollo. Because the Apollo brings the capabilities of rescuing those people and then fully curing them. So you can rescue anyone and you can provide that full-on medical treatment, perhaps with a few exceptions for replacing things like limbs, or maybe doing some modifications to people, which might be only limited towards the MISC Endeavor. But I really think that if you want to start a medical career in Star Citizen and you have the budget for it, I would start it off with the RSI Apollo. either the standard triage or the medevac version, whichever suits your fancy. But these are really the the mid-range standards for this sort of a career, and it's quite common. Like with a lot of careers, you got your basic budget options are just limited, and that makes sense in many ways, and they can still be enjoyable, but if you want to get the most out of it, it's in that midfield where things are most interesting. Now, if you have a few more players around, then of course going with that MISC Endeavor, with those home modules and that hangar module, then you really have a full-on flying hospital. And I think that can be really interesting if that's your field of interest, because you're looking at being able to, maybe fly to a disaster zone of either conflict or whatever else, get in there and just start receiving patients from all these other ships there that can bring them in, and you can start working on curing them and stuff like that. I think it would be a very interesting form of gameplay, very hectic, and I think if they do it well with the missions, it can be really, really fucking cool. Because you are going to be the disaster people, that like if an earthquake happens, they set up tents in our current day world, they come in there, they set up these entire tent hospitals and things like that, and you are that but with a spaceship. So like something went wrong in that system on that planet, and you just take that contract and you fly over there, you put your ship in low Earth orbit, and you just start receiving those patients. You start taking care of them. Maybe you need to configure some of the recovery areas into emergency stuff. Like got too many patients, you need to do things, you need to make your choices and things like that. It could be very, very interesting and very, very cool, I think, to have to play around with that. And I think I would personally see that as a very enjoyable career in Star Citizen, but it will require more people. So you're looking really at more of a smaller group of people, maybe in an org or something like that. And speaking about organizations, if medical is really what you want to do with your organization, then of course you're going to base it around the Endeavor, and you're going to support that with the Apollos and the Cutlass Reds, because you're going to need the entire full-on circle in that regard. And depending on the areas where you operate, you may want some security. So perhaps you are operating near Vandul space, for example, then maybe having a hammerhead flying with your MISC Endeavor may be a very wise idea to fend off any attacks, because the Vandul probably will not really respect the fact that you're an hospital ship. I mean, most humans in wartime were very bad about respecting hospitals and hospital ships. It's like one of those things they say, like in things like Geneva Convention, these are the rules, and when it comes down to it, everybody just ignores the damn rules and shoots you anyway. So that's something to keep in mind if you really want to focus your organizations around the full-on medical service. Now, as if you're a smaller organization like Cutlass Red, maybe somewhat handy, but I really think if you're expecting a need for a medical sort of facility and things like that, you want to support your organization with an Apollo, because again, it's that golden midway, and it can just do it all. Like most larger ships will have the means to probably treat some of the larger injuries, so having an Apollo with those tier 2 and tier 1 beds, capable of handling those more serious injuries, will be really beneficial for your organization. Now, if you're a organization that has those large military ships and that's focused around those, you probably want to have some of the Cutlasses and some of the Apollos as a means of rescuing your pilots or ground personnel that have been injured or that had to eject or whatever. So they're going to be used mostly as a transport means to get them to your larger ships, which will have their medical facilities, as I assume. So in that case, perhaps you will configure your Apollos with 6 beds, and your idea is like we just stabilize the patient until we can get them to the proper medical facilities. Now, if you're a large org, is having a Hope Endeavor around going to be handy? depends. Like, if you're really large and you really expect to go into large scale conflict and get a lot of injuries, maybe it can be worth the investment. But I think overall, having the Cutlass Reds, having some of the Apollos as a means to gather the people and then just use the medical facilities that you have already on your larger ships, again, as I assume, will be more than sufficient to cope with any injuries that your players may sustain or that your NPCs may sustain. Again, of course, we're just theory crafting on those matters, so we don't really know for sure. Well, I think that pretty much covers up everything around the RSI Apollo and the potential uses for them. Not just the RSI Apollo, but also, of course, the Cutlass and the MISC Endeavor, the medical gameplay. I think it covers up the uses for those and what you can expect from them. Again, the big question mark right now is going to be how they're going to handle the MISC Endeavor and the Hope module and the Hangar module. What will we see with them size-wise, capability-wise? That's going to be the next interesting thing. I really hope they're going to give the MISC Endeavor the additional level of capability. Like I said, the RSI Apollo may be able to cure, may be able to save you from an absolutely mortal wound, but if your arm is gone, they don't have the means to replace your arm. So you would need to go to a hospital or something like a MISC Endeavor to replace your arm. And maybe that could even be the same for the medical facilities on these larger capital ships. Like, maybe ships like a Bengal and things like that, but maybe ships like an Idris and a Javelin will also don't have that means to replace your arm. So you would need to go to a full-on hospital, which would be a MISC Endeavor. But again, if you're a combat organization, I don't think you won't be really doing that yourself, because it won't happen too much. So you would just employ an organization or a group of players that has that MISC Endeavor, and you just say, like, okay guys, we got a bunch of people that need some serious work done to them. How much would it cost for you to do that? So yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting in Medical Career Install Citizen. Of course, still have to see how the gameplay in the end will work out, but I think the foundation is good and simple, which means they can build out on top of that and they can expand on it, but if they find out that's too much, they can always reduce it back down without causing any issues, because the foundation is very clear and simple. And I think it will be very fun. So I probably will be adding that mad effect to my fleet after all. Anyhow, I hope you found this interesting and informative. As always, if you got any feedback, do please leave it down below for me. And besides all of that, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.